After my divorce, my son did something I never expected. The night after my divorce was finalized, the silence in my home was deafening. For more than 20 years, the weekends had been filled with the hum of laughter in the kitchen, the soft sound of water running in the bathhouse, the quiet rhythm of family tradition. But now, it was just me. A single mug on the counter, a sofa that suddenly felt too wide, a life I no longer recognized. I never expected the thing that would pull me back from that hollow space to be Logan, my son. 22, gentle-hearted and full of quiet strength, he was always thoughtful, but after the separation, he became something more, a constant. He insisted we continue our weekend bathhouse visits, an old ritual we used to share as a family. At first, I resisted. It felt like clinging to a broken past. But Logan had that determined tone in his voice, the one he used as a child when he wanted one more story before bed. "We don't have to let everything change, Mom." So I gave in. That Saturday, as we stepped into the cedar-scented warmth of the steam room, something shifted, not in the world outside, but in me. For the first time in weeks, I felt held not by arms, but by routine, by memory, by something safe and known. Logan sat beside me, shoulders broad, voice calm, presence steady. He didn't pry. He didn't offer advice. He simply asked, "You seem better." I wanted to say yes, but all I could say was, maybe just adapting. He nodded with that quiet understanding only he seemed to have, and in that shared silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The first time I stepped into the bathhouse after the divorce, I wasn't expecting peace. I was expecting awkward silence. I was expecting to feel every inch of what I had lost. But Logan, ever patient, ever present, somehow made it feel familiar again. He didn't talk much at first. He didn't need to. The steam room, with its warm, cedar-scented air and the hiss of water against the heated rocks, had a way of creating a space where silence didn't feel empty. It felt intentional. Healing, even. We sat shoulder to shoulder on the wooden bench wrapped in towels and steam. At first, I was hyper-aware of everything, my posture, my thoughts, the echo of the past. But slowly, the warmth seeped into me, softened the ache in my chest, and loosened the grip of memory. Logan leaned back, head resting gently against the wall, eyes closed. He looked so grown, so calm. At 22, he carried himself like a man who had already weathered storms, and maybe he had. The divorce hadn't just broken my heart, it had shaken his foundation too. And yet here he was sitting beside me in quiet solidarity, still showing up. That night we didn't discuss my ex-husband in detail. We didn't need to. We shared tea afterward in the lounge wrapped in thick blankets and laughed about how he used to beg to stay in the sauna as a boy, how his father would eventually drag him out with exaggerated theatrics, sweating and swearing it was medically unsafe. Logan laughed at the memory, and I found myself laughing too. Not the kind of laughter you force to prove you're okay, but the kind that sneaks out unguarded, surprising even yourself. Something inside me softened that night. Something loosened. I didn't cry. Not then. But I felt tears welling up in quiet places I had ignored for too long. Tears not of grief, but of release. And that became our new rhythm. Every Saturday, we returned to the bathhouse. We would alternate between the steam room, the plunge pool, and long stretches of tea sipping and reflection. Each week, the space between us grew less guarded. Logan opened up more about his job, his friends, the dreams he kept tucked away. And I found myself sharing things I hadn't said out loud in years. My fears about being alone, about aging, about feeling invisible now that the roles I'd clung to for decades had shifted beneath my feet. He listened. Not as a child listening to a mother, but as a man listening to a woman he respected. That distinction mattered more than I realized. It was sometime around our 4th visit when I first noticed the subtle shift. Not in Logan, but in me. The anticipation I felt for Saturday wasn't just about the peace of the sauna. It was about him, about our connection, about how his eyes lit up when he saw me, how his laughter wrapped around me like warmth. I told myself I was imagining it. that I was just starved for affection and mistaking comfort for something else. But there were moments that made me question, like when he would reach for my hand without a second thought, or how his fingers would linger when passing me a towel. The softness in his voice when he asked, "Are you okay, Mom?" and the depth in his eyes when I answered, even when I wasn't. Still, I did what most people do when faced with emotions that scare them. I buried them under logic. But that only lasted so long. The turning point came on a Saturday evening like any other. We'd just finished our steam room session and were back in the lounge. Logan looked especially relaxed, his muscles loose, his hair damp. He sat beside me close enough that our arms touched. He looked over and said, "You seem lighter lately. Do I?" He nodded. "It's good to see." His hand brushed mine as he passed me a fresh cup of tea, and it stayed there a beat longer than usual. That pause, it held weight. I tried to shake it off. But when I glanced at him, he was already looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. The truth was, I didn't know what was happening between us. I didn't know what it meant. All I knew was that I felt something blooming in the quiet, a bond that had once been rooted in parenthood now evolving into something I didn't quite recognize. Was it just closeness born of shared pain? Or was it something else entirely? That question lingered as we continued our weekly rituals. Logan grew more attentive, booking me a massage when I didn't ask, bringing me flowers one evening, just because touching my arm when he said goodbye in a way that felt tender, almost reverent. He said things that lingered in the corners of my mind. "You're stronger than anyone I know. You deserve to feel good again." And once, when I was drifting off in the sauna, he whispered, "You're still beautiful, you know." I opened my eyes, startled. "What?" He smiled shyly. "I just think someone should tell you that." I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't, but my heart raced for hours afterward. Back home that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, wrapped in my robe, staring at my reflection. For the first time, I saw something new. A woman still capable of desire, still worthy of being noticed. It terrified me, not because of Logan, but because of what it revealed in me, that I had missed being seen, not just by a partner, but by anyone. And now I was, in a way that was both comforting and confusing. The following weekend, I arrived at the bathhouse late. Logan was waiting for me with a small bouquet white lilies and pink roses. Elegant, modest. "I thought you could use something beautiful," he said, handing them to me. I stared at him, my chest tightening. "Logan, I just wanted to do something kind. You've done a lot for me, too." We stood there in the soft, candle-lit hallway for a long moment, neither of us speaking. Then he leaned in and kissed my cheek, slow, warm, lingering. "Let's go in," he said. That night, everything felt different. Every glance, every movement seemed charged with an unspoken current. And yet nothing inappropriate happened, nothing explicit, just shared warmth, shared silence, shared breath. It was intimacy of a different kind, and I didn't know what to do with it. As we drove home in silence, I kept glancing at him. Logan, my son, my companion, my anchor. I loved him deeply, but in that moment, I didn't know where one type of love ended and another began. All I knew was that Saturday had become the brightest part of my week, and I didn't want it to end. The week after Logan brought me roses, I found myself thinking about him constantly, not just as my son, but as someone who had become my center. It disturbed me not because I questioned his intentions, but because I wasn't entirely sure of mine. I was craving affection. That was true, but I also knew this wasn't just about needing someone. It was about how he made me feel safe, cherished, emotionally nourished in a way I hadn't experienced in years, not even in my marriage. And what scared me most was how natural it felt, how easy it had become to slide into intimacy with him, even if nothing explicitly inappropriate had happened. Yet the closeness was undeniable. That Saturday, I dressed with unusual care. I told myself it was silly, that I wasn't dressing for him, I just wanted to feel confident. But deep down, I knew better. I chose a soft wrap that brought out the green in my eyes and brushed my hair with a bit more attention. I caught my own gaze in the mirror and paused. "What are you doing?" I asked myself, and I had no answer. When I came downstairs, Logan was already waiting by the door, his coat open and scarf loosely draped around his neck. He looked up at me and smiled, not just a casual grin, but something warmer. His eyes lingered for a second longer than usual, and then he cleared his throat. "You look nice," he said, voice low. "Thanks," I replied, brushing past him to grab my bag. The drive to the bathhouse was filled with light conversation updates on his job, a funny story about a colleague. But beneath our words, there was a hum of something unspoken, a kind of energy that vibrated quietly beneath the surface of everything. When we entered the lounge, the receptionist greeted us by name. We were regulars now, familiar, predictable in our routine. But this time, instead of heading to the main steam room, Logan asked, "Want to try the smaller one tonight? The private one?" I hesitated. The smaller steam room was more secluded, more intimate, but I nodded. Sure. Inside the room was dim with low lighting and a single row of wooden benches. The air was heavy with eucalyptus, the steam rising like whispers between us. We sat close, not touching, but close. Logan leaned back, arms resting on the bench behind him, his legs stretched out. I sat beside him, hands folded in my lap, every breath deep and deliberate. "You've been quiet tonight," he said after a while. "I've had a lot on my mind," I replied truthfully. "Want to talk about it?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy I'd raised was gone. In his place was a man, kind, attentive, calm, in a way that steadied me. He had his father's chin, but not his distance. He had my emotional insight, but none of my fear. Sometimes I feel like I'm becoming someone else, I admitted. Is that bad? I don't know yet. He shifted toward me slightly. "You're allowed to change, Mom. You've been through a lot. I just don't want to lose who I was." He smiled gently. "I think you're becoming more of who you are, not less." His words landed heavily. They weren't flirtatious. They weren't wrong. They were just true. We stayed like that for a while, the sound of dripping condensation filling the silence. Eventually, we moved back to the lounge for tea. Logan poured mine first, as he always did, and handed me the cup with both hands. His fingers brushed mine again, lingering just a beat too long, but I didn't pull away. Later at home, I offered to return the favor from the week before. "Want that massage I promised?" I asked, aiming for playful but landing somewhere else entirely. He raised a brow. "You're serious. Fair is fair." He lay down on the couch and I knelt beside him, hands moving gently over his back. My palms were steady, but my mind was anything but. The heat of his skin beneath my fingers felt too intimate, too aware. His breathing slowed, and he murmured, "That feels amazing." I swallowed. "Good." He turned his head slightly. "You really missed your calling. You're a natural." "Just a mom's instinct," I said, trying to laugh. But neither of us laughed. Eventually I said, "That's enough for tonight," and pulled my hands away. But the silence that followed was heavy. Logan sat up, his expression unreadable. "Thanks. That really helped." He stood stretched and turned to leave the room. But before he did, he paused at the door. "Good night, Mom," he said, then added softer, "I'm really glad we do this." "Me too." That night, lying in bed, I replayed every word, every look, every touch, and I asked myself the question I had been avoiding for weeks. Was I crossing a line? And if so, which one? The line between healing and dependency, between comfort and confusion, between parental love, and something I didn't want to name. The next morning I woke up early and took a long walk through the park. The air was crisp and the leaves had started to turn. Everything felt like it was in transition, like the world around me reflected the turmoil within. I thought about calling a friend, about asking for perspective, but what could I say? "Hey, I think I might be emotionally tangled up with my son." No, that wasn't something you said out loud. So instead, I went home, made coffee, and sat in the stillness. That week passed slowly. Every time I saw the bouquet Logan had given me, I felt a pang of something I couldn't place. Guilt, longing, maybe both. When Saturday came, I wasn't sure if I should go. But when Logan texted, "You still in?" I replied, "Always." Because that was the truth. I didn't know what was happening between us. but I wasn't ready to let it go. By the time Saturday arrived, my emotions had become a quiet storm calm on the surface, but turbulent just beneath. I had spent the entire week going through the motions, tending to small chores, sipping my tea in the garden, but never quite escaping the memory of Logan's touch. Or the way his eyes had held mine like he was trying to say something he couldn't yet put into words. When he showed up at my door that evening, bouquet in hand again, this time simple daisies and lavender, I felt the air shift the moment he stepped inside. "You didn't have to," I whispered, already overcome by the gesture. "I wanted to," he said simply. "You looked like you needed a reason to smile today." And he was right. I had barely slept the night before, plagued with thoughts I didn't know how to label. It wasn't guilt, not fully. It wasn't desire either, not in the way the world defines it. It was something softer, more complicated. We rode to the bathhouse in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because both of us were afraid that saying anything might open a door we weren't ready to walk through. That night, the steam room felt different, heavier, more intimate. We returned to the private room, our sanctuary. I sat first, folding the towel beneath me with careful precision, grounding myself in the familiar ritual. Logan followed his steps slower, more deliberate. When he sat beside me, we weren't touching, but the heat between us felt almost physical. "Long week?" he asked after a moment, his voice low. I nodded, brushing damp hair from my forehead. "I've been in my head too much." He glanced sideways. "Want to talk about it? I don't know what I'd even say." He didn't push. Instead, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence do what it always did, make room for truth. After a long pause, I whispered, "Have you ever felt something changing between two people but didn't know if it was right to name it?" His eyes opened slowly. He looked at me, not startled, not confused, just deeply, quietly present. "Yes," he said. My breath caught. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. That one word was enough to make the steam feel suddenly suffocating. "I think I need some air," I said, standing abruptly. Outside in the cool night, I sat on the wooden bench under the soft glow of the porch light. My hands trembled slightly as I clasped them in my lap. Moments later, I heard the door creak behind me, and then Logan sat down beside me without a word. We stared out into the stillness, the gravel path glistening faintly under the moonlight. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said softly. "You're not." He looked at me. "Then what are we doing?" "Mom?" His voice was calm, but the question sat between us like a fragile truth waiting to be acknowledged. I swallowed. "I don't know." "I don't want to cross a line," he continued, "but lately it feels like we're standing on it." "I know," I whispered. And I did. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't even about romance. It was about closeness, the kind that had morphed in the absence of traditional love. It was about touch, about safety, about being seen. And once you've tasted that after so long without it, it's hard to draw a clean boundary around it. "I think I've leaned on you too much," I admitted. "I didn't mean to, but I have." He shook his head. "You've leaned on me exactly as much as you needed to," and I leaned right back. I turned to him, feeling a lump rising in my throat. "I don't know what to do with how I feel." He looked back at me with eyes full of gentleness. "Then, don't do anything. Just be here, with me. That's all I've ever needed." It was that moment, simple quiet, where I felt the most vulnerable, the most human, because for all the confusion, all the emotional tension, this was also my son, the child I had raised, the man who now held my heart in an entirely different way. And though nothing had happened that the world might call wrong, we were both aware that something delicate, intimate, and transformative had been growing between us, and we didn't know where to place it. That night, back at home, the energy was quieter, softer. I made tea while he stretched out on the couch. We talked about movies, laughed about his coworkers, and I found myself settling into a peace I hadn't felt since long before the divorce. It was past midnight when he finally said, "You look tired. Want a massage?" I froze. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. "I'm okay," I replied, But thank you. He nodded. Just thought I'd return the favor. I smiled gently. You already have. The days that followed were complicated. I found myself pulling away not in anger but in protection. From the world, from judgment, from myself. I needed to sort through what all of this meant. If it was simply a misplaced longing, if I was projecting needs that had no place in our bond, or if we were just two hearts clinging to each other in the wake of shared abandonment. I journaled. I walked for hours. I replayed every conversation, and I cried alone in the shower into the collar of my coat on long walks. But when Saturday came again, I still said yes. We didn't go to the private room that time. We kept things lighter, more casual, but the connection was still there, unshaken, untouched by the decision to step back. As we sat in the lounge afterward sipping chamomile tea, he turned to me and said, "You're not alone. You know that, right? I know." His hand found mine, and this time I didn't analyze the gesture. I just held on. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from clear answers. It comes from presence, from choosing someone who chooses you back, from sitting in your confusion and knowing someone else is willing to sit beside you in it. And that was what Logan had become for me, not a replacement for love lost, not a mistake waiting to happen, but a constant, a witness to my healing, a quiet protector of my heart. Later that night as we drove home, he asked if I was hungry. I shrugged. A little. "Then let's get takeout," he said. "Something easy. I'll even let you pick the movie." We curled up on the couch, shared noodles from the same container, and watched some silly romantic comedy that neither of us really cared about. But it didn't matter. Because in that moment, we were just two people who had walked through something painful, and somehow, despite it all, had found comfort in each other's presence. And maybe for now, that was enough. Maybe for now, we didn't need to define what we were becoming. We just needed to hold space for it, together. Healing doesn't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes it doesn't come through therapy sessions or long conversations with friends. Sometimes it arrives quietly wrapped in the scent of eucalyptus and steam, in the warmth of shared silence, in the steady presence of someone who refuses to let you fall apart alone. For me, it came in the form of my son. Logan didn't save me. That's not what this is. But he stood with me while I learned to save myself. After the divorce, I thought I had lost everything. My marriage, my identity, my rhythm. But in that loss, something else found space to grow a deeper bond between us. One not confined to titles like mother or son, but rooted in mutual respect, emotional intimacy, and quiet resilience. Our weekly rituals at the bathhouse became more than tradition. They became a lifeline, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The unspoken trust, the safety in just being together. Yes, there were moments of confusion, moments when boundaries blurred, when the hunger for connection clouded the lines. But through it all, we stayed honest. We never betrayed each other's trust. We simply leaned into the closeness, allowing it to teach us something deeper about love, not the kind born of romance, but of emotional presence, of deep human care. If you're watching this, and you've felt lost after divorce, after heartbreak, after the world you built fell apart, this is for you. Healing is not linear, it's not tidy, and it doesn't always follow the rules we expect, but it's possible. Sometimes the person who helps you rebuild isn't a partner or a stranger. Sometimes they've been beside you all along. Quiet, steady, waiting for you to remember your worth. So here's my question for you. Who stood beside you when you felt like giving up? Who saw you when you felt invisible? Drop their name or your story in the comments. Because your healing matters. Your voice matters. And if this story resonated with you, please take a second to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories about rediscovery, resilience, and the quiet power of human connection. No matter where you are in your journey, you are not alone, you are not broken, and you are still worthy of being seen, held, and loved. Thank you for watching, and thank you for feeling this with me.